When you hear the United States went to war, what pops into your head first? Maybe World War II, a big declared war, or perhaps Vietnam, even though, well, that wasn't technically declared. Most of us probably think every major U.S. military action was a formal war. But as we're about to find out in this deep dive, that idea, it really misses a huge chunk of the actual story.
It absolutely does. Because, it's kind of astonishing, the United States has only formally declared war 5 times in its whole history.
Only five. Yeah.
5. And those declarations, sure, they were significant, but they only cover 11 specific fights against certain nations. Now compare that to the 147 non-colonial military conflicts that are currently on these lists we're looking at, and 7 of those are happening right now.
147? That's a lot more than 11.
Right. And if you look at all 6 lists together, they go way back. From 1609 right up to today, you get a total of 184 military conflicts. It's a pretty big difference.
A huge difference. I mean, so today on the deep dive, we're digging into these lists of wars involving the United States. Our aim here is really to understand what actually counts as a war or a military conflict when you look at these historical records. We want to give you, a shortcut to getting properly informed on this using the source material itself.
Exactly. Our mission is to clear up the criteria. What gets something included on these lists? What kinds of conflicts make the cut? And maybe the most surprising part, what ongoing things involve the U.S. military now that you might not think of as a typical war? It's really about rethinking conflict.
Okay, so given that massive gap between the declared wars and everything else, let's start with those few official ones. What were those 5 times Congress actually declared war, and who was it against?
Sure. So the very first one was the War of 1812 against the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Then came the Mexican-American War against Mexico. After that, the Spanish-American War against Spain.
Right.
Then World War I. That involved declarations against Germany and Austria-Hungary.
2 declarations there.
Yes. And finally, World War II, which had declarations against Japan, Germany, Italy, and also Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. And it's really important to remember, under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it's Congress, and only Congress, that has the power to declare war.
Okay, right. So let's unpack this. If we only have those 5 formal declarations covering just 11 specific nations, how in the world do we jump from that to 147 conflicts, or even the full 184? That just seems like a massive leap.
It is a huge leap, and this is where it gets really critical for you, the listener, to understand the distinction. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has been involved in, well, countless military operations all over the world.
Okay.
These were operations authorized by Congress sometimes, or started by the executive branch, the president.
Yep.
But here's the key bit. They happened without a formal declaration of war.
Ah, I see. So authorization, but not declaration.
Precisely. Think about really big conflicts like the Korean War or the Vietnam War, both part of the Cold War era.
Right. Very familiar examples.
Or, more recently, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq War. Those fall under the War on Terror. None of those were formally declared wars by Congress.
So that constitutional power to declare war, it's still there, but in practice, it's mostly been bypassed since World War II.
That's a fair way to put it. The practice has definitely shifted. It raises all sorts of questions, about accountability, public debate.
Yeah, I can see that. If the executive branch can initiate military action without that formal congressional step.
Exactly. It shifts the balance of power, doesn't it? A lot of that decision-making moves away from the legislature, often with less public discussion beforehand. It's a really significant change in how the U.S. engages internationally, and it definitely affects how we, the public, see U.S. military involvement.
That really clarifies the difference between declared and simply involved. But okay, it makes me wonder about these lists then. What are they actually using as the definition? What counts as a military conflict to get you such a massive number?
Well, these lists use a much, much broader definition than just those formally declared wars. The core idea is they include any military conflicts involving the United States military, regardless of size.
Regardless of size. Okay, that's broad.
It is. And when they say United States military, it's not just, Army, Navy, Marines, the ones everyone thinks of.
Right.
It also includes the Air Force, the Space Force now, and even the Coast Guard, but only when it's acting in a military role.
Okay, Coast Guard too. Interesting.
And it goes further. It can include parts of the U.S. intelligence agencies, like the CIA's Special Activities Center, again, if they're doing military-type operations. And then there's some you really might not expect, like the Public Health Service Commissioned Corps, or the NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps.
Wait, NOAA, like the weather people.
Well, their commissioned officer corps, yes, if they're acting in a military capacity, it's specific. And maybe controversially for some, U.S. private military companies, PMCs, can also be included in this definition for the lists.
Wow. That is incredibly inclusive. It paints a much wider, maybe even a more sobering picture than most people probably have in mind. It really does expand the idea of U.S. involvement globally. Okay, so we've covered what is on the list, which is already a lot more than expected, but sometimes what's left out is just as revealing. So what kind of things are deliberately excluded? What doesn't make the cut, and why?
Right, the exclusions are interesting too. Generally, the list don't include things like small-scale rebellions or riots or individual assassination attempts, even famous ones like on JFK or Donald Trump. Those aren't military conflicts in this context.
Okay, so internal stuff mostly.
Yeah, or political actions like coup attempts, the overthrow of Hawaii, for instance, or the business plot back in the day, they're out. Also, things like pure cyber wars, think Operation Olympic Games against Iran's nuclear program, they aren't typically listed as military conflicts here. And definitely not family feuds like the Hatfields and McCoys, thankfully.
Right, no military intervention there.
Also generally excluded are things called filibuster wars, unless the U.S. military actually fought with the filibusters or took territory from them. Gang wars are out. Purely humanitarian missions like disaster relief aren't counted unless they turn violent. So Operation Sahyogi Hat in Nepal, for example, wouldn't be on the list.
Makes sense. Aid isn't conflict.
Exactly. Isolated terrorist attacks usually aren't listed as standalone conflicts either, like the Beirut barracks bombing. Though some attacks, like 9/11 or the Kabul airport attack in 2021, might be seen as part of a wider conflict, like the war in Afghanistan, but not listed individually.
I see, part of a larger whole.
Right. And other things like labor disputes, even violent ones like the Coal Wars or range wars like the Johnson County War, those are out. Peacekeeping missions are usually excluded, again, unless they escalate into actual fighting. And state versus state things, like the Toledo War between Ohio and Michigan, or trade wars, definitely not included.
So the key is direct U.S. military involvement in a conflict, not just any violence or government action.
That's the core rationale. The focus is tightly on military conflict involving the designated U.S. military entities, separating it from crime, internal politics, or non-combat ops.
Okay, that distinction helps. But you mentioned small-scale rebellions are out. Are there exceptions? What about something huge like the Civil War? Surely that's included.
Absolutely. You're right to ask. The Civil War is a major exception. It's included because of its sheer scale and national significance. Same for Bleeding Kansas. And also, importantly, all the territorial rebellions are included. Things like the Philippine-American War, the Moro Wars in the Philippines, the Mormon Wars in Utah, or even the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party insurgency. Those involve direct U.S. military campaigns.
Got it. So scale and direct military campaigns against organized groups matter there. What about piracy? You hear about anti-piracy operations.
Good point. Piracy operations can be included, but generally it needs to be a whole campaign, not just a single chase or battle. So something like Operation Ocean Shield, the multinational effort off Somalia, that's likely because it was a sustained military operation, but a single ship hijacking, like the Maersk, Alabama incident, probably wouldn't be listed on its own, unless perhaps it was a specific punitive mission or a hostage rescue that constituted a distinct operation with a major battle, like the Battle of Taiho Bay against Chinese pirates back in the 19th century.
Yeah.
That was a single, focused military action.
Okay, that clarifies the nuances there. So bringing it right up to today. Based on these lists and definitions, what publicly known military engagements are currently involving U.S. forces right now?
Well, according to the sources we're using, there are currently 7 publicly known military engagements. These cover 6 distinct wars, and all of them are categorized as interventions.
7 engagements, 6 wars. Okay, what are they?
They include the Yemeni Civil War, where the U.S. has been involved, particularly against Houthi forces, the Somali Civil War, continuing counterterrorism efforts there, the Syrian Civil War, where the U.S. still has a presence.
Right, those have been ongoing for a while.
Yes. And then there's the broader Middle Eastern crisis, which for these lists specifically includes involvement related to the Gaza war and the Israel-Hezbollah conflict. U.S. military assets and support are factors in those situations.
And putting this current activity in context, these lists stretch way back, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They cover an incredible historical span. There are lists for colonial American wars in the 17th and 18th centuries, sort of like historical prequels focusing on the colonies before they became the U.S.
Fascinating.
And then, yes, separate lists detailing conflicts century by century, 18th, 19th, 20th, and now the 21st. It's a really comprehensive and honestly quite eye-opening perspective on U.S. military history.
So, if we boil it down, the big takeaway from this deep dive seems clear. The U.S. has only formally declared war a few times, but its military has actually been involved in a much, much wider range of conflicts and operations throughout its history and continues to be. It really changes that common picture of going to war, moving it from just those big declared events to something more continuous, maybe?
Continuous, evolving, interventionist. Yeah, I think that captures it. It shifts the narrative significantly. And it leaves us with, well, a pretty provocative thought to consider, doesn't it? Given how conflict itself is changing globally, and knowing these specific broad criteria used to define U.S. military involvement, how does this difference between declared war and military engagement shape how the public understands conflict, how we perceive what war even means today?
Hmm. And what about the power balance between Congress, which is supposed to declare war, and the executive branch initiating these engagements?
Exactly. What does this decades-long trend mean for that constitutional balance? And looking ahead, how might this more nuanced understanding of U.S. involvement affect international relations, especially when the lines are so blurred? Hopefully understanding these definitions helps you, our listener, analyze current events a bit more critically and maybe question the labels we often just accept.